Imagine the year is 1346. Europe is a land of fractured kingdoms, clashing armies, and emerging technologies. On the rolling fields outside the small French village of Crécy, the sun dips toward the horizon. Thousands of armed men prepare for battle, their armor glinting in the light. The air is thick with tension. On one side stand the formidable forces of King Philip VI of France, an army of knights, crossbowmen, and foot soldiers 3 times the size of their enemy. On the other, King Edward III of England, his troops weary from a long march through hostile territory. It was here, on August 26th, that the course of medieval warfare was changed forever. Not with new siege engines or elaborate strategies, but with the power of a deceptively simple weapon, the longbow. Let's step back for a moment. Before Crécy, European warfare had been dominated by the mounted knight. These heavily armored warriors were the elite of medieval society, trained from a young age to fight on horseback, and equipped with the best weapons and armor money could buy. Their charge, horse and rider as a unified force, was a sight to behold and nearly unstoppable on the battlefield. Supporting them were crossbowmen, whose weapons packed a devastating punch but required time-consuming reloading and skill to operate effectively. The longbow, on the other hand, was a commoner's weapon. It wasn't flashy or expensive, but it was deadly in the hands of a skilled archer. Standing about 6 feet tall and made of yew wood, the longbow could shoot an arrow over 300 yards, nearly the length of 3 football fields. More importantly, it could pierce armor. The strength required to draw the bow was immense, often exceeding 100 pounds of force, and training to use it effectively required years of practice. But for those who mastered it, the longbow offered unmatched speed and range. While a crossbow might fire 1 or 2 bolts per minute, a longbowman could launch 6 arrows in the same amount of time. In England, longbow training became ingrained in society. Boys as young as 7 were required by law to practice archery. By the 14th century, England had developed a corps of highly trained archers whose skills were unmatched. Edward III would rely heavily on these men, his yeoman archers, at the Battle of Crécy. At the Battle of Crécy, their precision and discipline would prove decisive, as they unleashed a deadly symphony of arrows upon their foes. Now, as the English forces took position on a gentle ridge outside Crécy, Edward's strategy came into focus. Understanding the strength of his army, he opted for a defensive stance. His troops dug ditches and sharpened stakes to deter cavalry charges. His infantry and dismounted knights formed solid lines, while the longbowmen were arrayed on the flanks. This wasn't just a defensive move. It was a trap. The French, confident in their superior numbers and traditional tactics, began their attack in the late afternoon. The opening move came from their Genoese crossbowmen, mercenaries hired to support the French forces. They advanced under orders to pepper the English lines with bolts, softening them up for the cavalry to strike. But as they marched into range, disaster struck. You see, the day had been rainy. The wooden crossbows had absorbed moisture, making their strings slack and their shots less effective. In contrast, the English longbowmen, who had kept their bowstrings dry, fired at full strength. As the Genoese reached firing range, their first volley was met with a thunderous reply. Thousands of English arrows darkened the sky. The results were catastrophic. The Genoese, poorly armored, were cut down before they could even retreat. Those who fled were trampled by the advancing French cavalry. At this point, the French knights charged. This was the moment they believed would win the day. The thunder of hooves and the clash of steel as they bore down on the English lines. But they hadn't reckoned with the longbow. The English archers adjusted their aim, and another deadly hail of arrows rained down. Picture it. Horses rearing, knights tumbling from their saddles, chaos spreading as Edward's archers fired volley after volley. The heavy armor that had once been the knights' greatest protection now worked against them. For all their glory, the mounted knights were no match for the range, speed, and precision of the longbows. Many fell before they even reached the English line. Those who did were met by prepared infantry and hastily constructed defenses. The French launched 15 separate charges over the course of the battle, each more desperate than the last. And with every wave, the English longbowmen held their ground, their devastating precision breaking the morale of even the bravest knights. By nightfall, the battlefield was littered with the bodies of thousands of French soldiers, while English casualties were astonishingly light in comparison. The Battle of Crécy wasn't an isolated victory. It was a turning point. For centuries, the mounted knight had been the pinnacle of military power in Europe. But Crécy proved that discipline, strategy, and technology, in the form of the longbow, could overcome the most fearsome armies. It marked the beginning of the decline of chivalric warfare, where individual valor on the battlefield was supreme. In its place came a new era of tactics, where common soldiers wielding advanced weaponry could decide the fate of kingdoms. But the true legacy of the longbow lies in what it represented: a shift in the balance of power on the battlefield. As the sun set on the fields of Crécy that fateful day in 1346, the world of warfare had forever changed, and the symphony of arrows that echoed through the valley became a living testament to the longbow's enduring legacy.